Welcome back. We are Gentlemen United, and you are in the Man Cave. I'm your host, Sean Best.
I want to offer this. I thought it was also depressing when I first stumbled across it. But the more that I thought about it, the more energized I actually felt. Because it basically put the full circle on every single man's life, from birth to death. We were all born and we're all going to die. What do you do in the middle that's going to make a difference?
That's
As
right.
long as, right? So as long as you can accept that at the end of the day, you may have to sacrifice yourself, it's actually quite relieving because you have a mission. You can make a difference. You can make a difference for yourself, and you can make a difference for the people that you care about. So I actually found it an incredibly liberating realization at the end of the day versus the depressing interpretation that most people and I myself had at first blush.
Well, you know what? That's interesting that you pointed out that way, because you think about it this way. And when you position it that way, it makes sense. We all have to die, right? So we can either spend our time sitting here, doing this, or we can actually do something meaningful.
Right.
But when you think about it, you said just now it was energizing for a man, and I can see how that would be energizing for men. So not so much a dying on time, but at some point you have to die on time. You have to die. It's having a purpose, having a focus, having a function. And I've had this conversation in with different other friends of mine who are men, and who at times in their lives, myself included, where you just kind of felt like you were sitting in a life raft in the middle of the ocean at nighttime with no moonlight and no land in sight, and you're just kind of floating around. You felt like I'm not going anywhere. I don't know what I'm doing. And the having a purpose or a goal or a function, something to do, it's energizing. It's empowering. Now, I guess my question to you is this: given your interaction with both sexes, do you find that same response of I feel energized, I have a purpose, I have a function, and the dying on time part is just sort of the exclamation mark? There you go, stamp, did it, I'm out. Do women have the same response to that concept of show up, produce, and die on time?
What do you mean by the response? Response for themselves, or
in terms of
men?
The sense of empowerment? I feel empowered now. I'm showing up. That concept, the way you described it just now. Now that you positioned the way that you did, a lot of men will be able to identify with that, having a purpose, having a function, and going out in a blaze of glory, or whatever the case might be. Do women respond to that concept the way you just position it in the same way that men do?
Well, here's where I go off the rails and create enemies, and there'll be effigies burning of me in parks all over the country.
This is what I do.
Right, exactly. I'll answer that in two ways. Right, none of them are evading the question. First and foremost, these three things resonate with men. At the end of the day, they don't resonate with most women. What resonates in this trilogy for women is this trilogy is why women partner with men, first and foremost. So they recognize that this is the role and job for men. It does not, however, resonate as strongly with them because their instincts are pointing at other things, other priorities, partnering, connecting, procreating, building and being. We speak a lot about men are human doings and women are human beings. And here, right there, is the answer to your question as to how we resonate with this dynamic. I haven't really spent any time on the other side of it to say, well, do women have a trilogy? Do they have one thing? Do I have others? I've just gotten as far as this trilogy for men. So in a way, they do respond to it, but only as it relates to why they partner with men, number one. And it does not, however, correspond to the bulk of their instinct, because I think a very good illustration of this is now that the U.S. military and the Israeli military, for that matter, have opened up combat roles for women. You can look at the U.S. and very few women have actually signed up. It's literally like still single digits. And the ones who have signed up have not made it through. And a lot of it gets back to values, but obviously a lot of it gets back to the physical ability that is inherent in what they're discovering. So I hope that answers the question.
It does. It does. It's funny you hit on a topic that I was about to hit on, which is the men being viewed as human, women being viewed as human beings and treated as such, and not just from a social perspective, but from a legislative perspective. and but men view it largely as human doings. And
Right.
for those who don't really get the concept, a woman's value is in who she is as a person. A man's value is in what he does. If he doesn't produce, to your earlier point, that he's not doing as a human doing, he's not of any value. That's the way people see it. He's being seen. So now, we talked a bit about male disposability. Does it really exist? And can you give us some concrete examples of what male disposability is? I know you touched on it a little bit, but can we just delve into that a little bit more?
Well, when we look at 96 to 97% of workplace fatalities are men. When we look at 96, 97% of wartime fatalities are men. When we look at 85% of the layoffs that occurred basically during the last recession, going back to 2008, it's actually been nicknamed the man session because the layoffs were majoritively men. So as you begin to look around, I mean, I do respect that this is sort of a very difficult conversation for people to sort of jump into if they've not really been familiar with it, because, we're raised in a culture that says, hey, all life is valuable. We must value human life, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But the irony is, to maintain that as a societal value, it requires that men be sacrificed for it. Because whether we like it or not, or whether certain people like it or not, a woman's value in terms of what she can produce is offspring. Without women, we don't have a society. Without women, we don't have a population. And, we don't need as many men to keep things popping. One man can populate an entire nation. It doesn't work the other way around. And the more we try to deny the biological realities of this, and the more we also deny the reality that this equation exists in other creatures on this earth other than humans, we start to realize that this is not merely a political manufacture, but it's actually the way that societies of all creatures that have any kind of intelligence begin to formulate themselves. There are matriarchies and there are ultimately patriarchies. And from a survival perspective, it's impossible, when you take a really serious, honest look at it, it's impossible to ignore that reality. So when we talk about, in a shooting in a movie theater, who throws themselves on whom, right? So how often do you hear that the guy threw himself on his girlfriend to save her life? Now, there is an exception to this as it relates to women. They will throw themselves onto people / creatures, children, anyone that's less powerful than them, they will do that. But by and large, they're not going to do that, or shall I say, they're not going to make the move to do that to the men. The person that they perceive to be their protector, they're not going to move to be his protector. And there's ample evidence that that's so. So the dynamic of male disposability, even as it relates to, so if you look at the divorce courts, we know that 85+% of children are assigned to the mother. And of course, some 85%+ of the people who pay child support and alimony are men. We hear about these celebrities because there's so much money that maybe she's the more successful, but those are extremely, extended exceptions to the rule. I have seen and I read about men who are on the hook for more than 100% of their income that must be paid out between child support and alimony. So that's another facet of male disposability, because one of the huge ramifications of that equation, when he is completely out of control, is male suicide. On average, we see that the male suicide rate is upwards to some 80% of suicides. And men in divorce, that equation actually goes even higher. That the men that will commit suicide based on their situation in divorce, it's getting close to almost be guaranteed that he's going to either harm himself or commit suicide.
Or just to
because
consider,
he's so out of control.
To consider making an attempt.
Exactly, right? So when we talk about male disposability, I think the only people who are surprised by it are people who are ideologically predisposed to not believe in it, or people who haven't been exposed to the concept. Otherwise, if you're an honest, awake person, you'll recognize that male disposability is the norm. I mean, Spartan, either come back with your shield or on your shield.
Right.
And that's what life
300.
and that's what life looks like.
If you enjoyed the show and want to see more, join our Facebook page called The Man Cave by Gentlemen United. All of our shows, tons of additional content, and invitations to future shows are posted there. You can add to the conversation and suggest future discussion topics. Please like, comment, share, and most of all, subscribe by clicking the Gentlemen United icon. I promise it's free. Thanks again for joining us in The Man Cave.
Enjoyed the show? Like, share and subscribe. And thanks for joining us in The Man Cave.